Good morning and welcome again to Word of Faith Response. This is Mark Morris, and it's so good to be with you this morning. I just want to say thank you for tuning in and listening to us. We have been doing this radio program now going on 6 months, and our website, wordoffaithfellowship.org, has all of our past radio programs. We have covered a lot of the allegations that have been at our church. We've brought in many people from our church that address and answer a lot of questions, and you can go to our website and you can find all of these radio programs, and they'll answer a lot of your questions. And we've also been sharing testimonies about what Jesus has done in our lives at the Word of Faith Fellowship, and it's been amazing. I have really enjoyed coming on this program and hosting it and being with all these people in our church, because it's amazing to hear how God has touched the lives of so many people from so many different backgrounds. And so we're going to have another testimony today, and it's a wonderful testimony, and I believe you're going to be encouraged. We have Lisa with us, and she has been at the Word of Faith Fellowship since 1989. She actually was visiting for years before that and came here from Florida. And so we're going to hear how God so has changed her life. And so let's listen as Lisa shares. Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jim, for letting us be here. Good morning, everybody. I just want to tell you that I am a total opposite of what I used to be when I grew up. I was always really very depressed because of situations in my life, and very selfish, very self-centered. That's changed. One of the first things I want to start out with is a scripture that God gave me when I began to look back over my life after we moved here, and I began to see through the clouds of all the oppression that I lived in. And it's a verse in Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. It says, "He has made everything beautiful and appropriate in its time. He's also planted eternity, a sense of divine purpose in the human heart, a mysterious longing which nothing under the sun can satisfy except God." That's a purpose that God put in us before we were even born. And if we don't follow after that purpose, if we don't seek God on our own, we have a lot of other trails that we can go down, Mark.
Right.
And we go through a lot of heartache. A lot of the heartache I went through, I didn't have to go through, because I knew somewhere deep on the inside of me that there was a God, regardless of what I was going through. I knew that there was a God, but there were times that I'd listen to Him and follow Him, and there were times that I didn't. The times that I didn't were the times that I went through rough times. So that purpose that He puts on the inside of us is like it's a drawing power, literally drawing us to Him daily. And I was born in 1951. I was the youngest of three. At the time that I was born, my father was already married to another woman and had 2 children, which I didn't find out about until after we moved here. But he was a very miserable man. He was an alcoholic, a very strong alcoholic. There was a lot of abuse in our home, all kinds of abuse. It was not a peaceful home. It was not a happy home. And actually, I didn't tell you, but when I was born with a hair lip. And so I had surgery when I was born and when I was 3 months. And all that just added to everything. And because of the alcohol in the home, it forms personalities. I saw that over the years. It forms personalities. At the age of, when I turned 8, my father passed away from colon cancer. And we lived in Ohio at the time. My mother had worked, and I don't know what all she went through in those years, but I know it had been really rough. We moved to Pennsylvania, where her only brother was, which really was God's provision on our lives, because he was a stabilizing point for my mom and for us. And I remember my best times growing up were probably out at Uncle Jim and Aunt Mamie's house, and being with my cousins. But we lived there. My mom worked 2 jobs, actually. She worked from Monday through Friday, and then she played an organ in a church on Sunday as a job. I was raised Episcopalian, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. There was just something in my heart that was searching for God. That's the only way I know to put it. And I couldn't find it. And I got involved in youth groups and churches. I went to several different churches when we lived in Pennsylvania as I was growing up. My mother met another man through where she worked when I was in 5th grade, and she began to date him, and their relationship grew. He was an alcoholic also, and actually a doctor told my mother, because her nerves were so bad, when you go home every day, you fix yourself a cocktail and you can calm down and have a good evening. So she did it, and she did it a lot. And so the two of them drank a lot. There was a lot of fighting and arguing. When I was in high school, being the youngest, my two older sisters, because of the strife and everything in the house, they moved out. They got married, moved out early. So it was just myself and my mom and my stepdad. And it was a bad situation. It was not good at all. So in my high school years, there were times that they'd go away for the weekend, and I'd be home by myself. I pretty much raised myself through my junior and senior year. My mother, when she, because of the stress and the work and everything else, a lot of times she would just go to bed at night and fall asleep. You couldn't get her awake, but my stepfather was awake, and because of the abuse, there were times that I just went out and I walked all night around town until the morning, and then came home, changed clothes, got on the bus, and went to school. I lost a lot of weight. I had bleeding ulcers for a period of time, but there was also a point in time there where the campus life had come into our public school. At that time, it was permitted up there in Pennsylvania, and that was a tremendous hope for me.
It's just like a Christian outreach that came to
It
the
is,
schools.
and it was really all over the United States. And it wasn't Campus Crusade, it was Campus for Life. And I don't know exactly what the difference was, but all I know was for the first time in my life I heard the message of salvation. I'd never heard the term being born again before. I didn't understand a lot of it at first, but we had a lot of Bible studies. The man that was over the campus life in our group was very compassionate. He shared a lot of scriptures with us. He had Bible studies with us. I mean, he was almost like a parent in a sense to a lot of us, and I think he was aware of the home situations we had. That really kind of helped get me through my junior and senior year of high school. But when you graduate from high school, you don't have campus life anymore. So I was back out on my own, and even though there were some things that God had put in my heart as a foundation, it wasn't strong enough for me. And I got married. I got a job, and I got married. I was only married for 9 months, and it was a very rough marriage. My husband was in the Justice Department, and he wanted to climb in the political world, and he felt that he could groom me to help him get to where he wanted to be as a politician. So after 9 months of a terrible time, I got a divorce, and I left Pennsylvania. My mom had moved to Florida during that time. I moved to Florida, and I didn't quite understand why I moved to Florida, because I'd had so many problems with my mom anyway. But I just felt in my heart that that's where I needed to go. And when I look back now, which I've done a lot of, there's a verse I want to share real quick in the book of Acts. And Paul was talking, it's in Acts 17, it's 26 and 27. It says, "He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their lands and territories. This was so they would seek God, if perhaps they might grasp for him and find him." And really, that's what was going on in my life. And I didn't realize it. I mean, I didn't understand that that was what was happening. I stayed with my mom for a short while, and I got a job and got a place of my own. And I met my husband that I have now, Gary Brown. We've been married for 44 years. And I realized that through the years that Gary and I were married, that what you end up doing, if you don't have a good, strong foundation or relationship with Jesus on the inside of you, you take into that marriage what you grew up in, what you had in a previous marriage. It's all combined, and you just take it in because that's what you've grown up through. That's all you know. And even parents, what you are taught, what you've done growing up with your parents is what you end up doing, and that's what you teach your children. And that's how we got traditions and everything else. So at any rate, Gary and I, we had a rough time. We loved each other, but we had a very rough time because he had a rough background and I had a rough background, and we weren't born again at the time. We didn't have a relationship with Jesus like we needed to. We did go to several churches while we were in Florida. I just always, on the inside of me, I just was looking for a specific church that had a pastor that I knew really had a pastor's heart. And really the man that was over our campus life, to me, had a pastor's heart. I felt that in him. I felt that he really cared and had a compassion regardless of where I was coming from. And that's what I was looking for. So we went to different churches. We had 3 children, and I wanted my children to be in a church where there would be some stability for them also. So through the course of time that we were down there, we got married in 73, and then we moved here in 89. So during that period of time, we moved a couple times. And like I said, we went to several different churches just searching. I couldn't find what God had put in my heart that I knew that I needed and what I knew my family needed. And I always was one to get very involved in churches, involved in people's lives. I always wanted to help people. I didn't know how to, and I knew I couldn't give them what I had because I didn't have anything to give them at that point in time. So the churches that we went to, there were just problems in the churches. There were things that went on that you couldn't just sit down and talk it through and work things out and have the love of God in the end of it, and everybody keep going on with Jesus and grow from it. And I had a lot of people in my life that I had gotten close to that had a lot of problems, just like Gary and I did. And we were searching. We were looking. And there was one church that we went to, actually, and we had a Christian school that we built. The church grew very fast. And a lot of people came from miles to come to this church. They had heard about it. And we had been there for several years, and I was very close to the pastors, and we had women's Bible studies. I was in Women's Aglow. We had the Christian school. It was busy, and it felt really good. But the more the church grew, it was more than what we could handle at that point in time. And at one point, the pressure was so bad, the pastor and his wife, they padlocked the door and they left town. This was in wintertime and a winter break from school. And I just had my last child. It was 1983. So during that winter break, I had to put my children in the public school, which I really didn't want to do. So we kept searching. There was several of us that met, once or twice a week at night, and we'd meet at our house, and we just prayed. All we wanted was a church, a true pastor, and we wanted God. That's all we wanted. And, but along the way, we kept seeing how God was drawing us. God was there for us. He would give us scriptures constantly. There were scriptures he'd get us. And it would just stabilize me. It would get me a rock to stand on until the next time. And I was aware of that all the time. And so we met. We went to another church. It grew fast. Again, it was a new church. And we had some more situations with that church, and we left. We wanted God. We really just we had certain things we knew that God had put in our heart, and that's what we were looking for. So over the course of time, we got together, we prayed, we had praise and worship, we sang, we praised God, we called each other, we checked on each other, we fellowshiped, we had meals at my house, we just did whatever we could just to stay together. And that felt right. It felt good in our heart. I knew in my heart we needed a pastor, though. I didn't want to just be there without a pastor. There was an understanding somehow God had put in my heart that it was very important to have a true pastor over us. And with the problems that were in some of the people around me in their lives, I knew that there was nothing that I could give them. I couldn't help them. And I knew that they definitely needed a pastor. So we prayed, we kept praying, and I had some friends that I had met down there in the church, and they were getting ready to be missionaries and go to Thailand. And they had some young children, and my children knew their children. So I went over one day and picked their children up and took them to a petting zoo. And they were trying to get funds together and get ready to go to Thailand as missionaries. So when I came back with their children to the house, I met some friends of theirs that had just come to visit from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was Robert and Marcia Lowry. Now, Robert Lowry was on the radio program, and I just met them briefly. It was, "Hi, this is Robert and Marcia Lowry. How are you?" "Fine," and I left. That was the end of it. But I didn't know, and I go back again to the purpose of God. If God hadn't impressed on me that morning, and I didn't realize it at the time, to go pick up the children and take them to the petting zoo and bring them back at that period of time, I would never have met Robert and Marcia. God, that was God again. And so we continued to meet in our house. I'm thinking it was probably about a month later. My phone rang one night, and this man's voice said, "Hi, my name is Robert Lowry, and I met you about a month ago. My wife and I, Marcia, and, we realize that you've been through some rough times and that you've been praying for a pastor, and we feel like God has told us to come and pastor." I was leery at the time. I was starved for it in a sense, but I was leery. And Robert talked to me probably for an hour that night, and I heard his heart, and that's what I needed. I needed to hear his heart, that he loved God, he loved Jesus. He preached salvation. He preached a personal relationship with Jesus. He preached hope. He preached faith. He preached the love of God and compassion. So he wanted to know if I could kind of help them when they got moved in. So we found him a house to rent. But for the first 2 weeks that they were there, they stayed with us. And that was God. It really was. It was definitely, again, it was God's purpose. When my phone rang, which was quite often with problems, people around me and stuff, I'd talk to them for a minute, and I'd introduce them to Robert and give the phone to Robert. And at every point, I watched Robert Lowry give them Jesus and give them hope. And there was just a peace that came over people and a hope that came to people. So we began having meetings, and people came, and he preached salvation, and he preached a personal relationship with Jesus. I had not heard that part of it, except I had heard some in Campus Life. It was like breathing fresh air. It was like a drink of water when you're thirsty. And we met. We had tremendous times. We prayed a lot. He knew Sam and Jane Whaley from when he was in Tulsa in Bible school. So the second seminar that they had here, they brought me, and
Here at the Word of Faith.
here at the Word of Faith, and it was the old 221 building, and it was very packed out, but the presence of God was so strong. When I walked through that door, I changed just walking through the door. And I was here for an entire week with them, and it was Robert, Marcia, and I at the seminar. And I heard strong prayer, loud prayer for the first time. I'd never heard it before, but in my heart it was yes, this is it. And I received strong prayer. I had a lot of oppression. I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. I had a lot of frustration. I had a lot of bitterness and anger. I had a lot on the inside of me because of what I'd been through. And you spend years packing it down because you've got to look right. But yet on the other hand, you've got that purpose of God working, drawing you to Him and leading your path on down the road to where you can get the help that you need so you can get the foundation and go on and help others. And that's what God was doing. So we went back after the first seminar, and I really, in one sense, didn't want to go back. I really wanted to stay because for the first time, I really felt a security, and I felt that foundation. So we went back to Florida. We had meetings. And the Bible school started here at the Word of Faith Fellowship. Robert and Marcia. Robert had actually been in a Bible school and knew Sam for several years, and Marcia knew them also. And when the Bible school started, Robert felt that God had spoke to him to come up for the Bible school, he and Marcia both. And we all knew, those of us down there in the church, we knew that that was the will of God. Robert never, for 1 second, ever let go of us. He called on the phone, he checked on us, he would send us tapes from the services up here so that we could listen. We would meet in my home. There weren't a whole lot of us, but we met in our home. And he visited us, he encouraged us, he checked on us. I knew that I had a pastor. I knew it. And it didn't matter whether people around us agreed, They didn't understand how we believed. They didn't understand the changes in us. They were drawn to it, but yet they didn't understand it. And some chose to leave and some chose to stay. But I felt like I knew God had me where he wanted me. We moved up here in 1989, and I packed up everything I could pack up in my little tiny car. And my 3 children, we found a house to rent, and we didn't have a thing. We ate tuna fish and spaghetti and peanut butter sandwiches and Cheerios. It didn't bother me a bit. I was so happy to be here. We started I jumped right into the church, jumped right into the school, put my children in the Christian school. Backtrack for a second. The schools that my children have been in Florida, the public schools, there was a lot through the state that had taken place that was really bad. Brought a lot of division between my children and myself. It was a state-run program that we didn't know anything about until God told me, pull your children out of there. I homeschooled my children for the last year. Basically, had all the encouragement and help that I needed from up here. Again, true pastors. And a true pastor to me is there for every area of your life. Whether it's your children's schooling, whether it's your spiritual condition, whether it's your physical condition. A true pastor is always there for you. And that's what I felt. I missed being here with them before we moved here, but I knew they had us in their hearts. I knew it. So we moved up here. We put them in the school. I actually taught in the school from 1989 until 2004 because I needed to know in my heart that my children were where they needed to be and that they were settled. And I loved teaching in this school. I absolutely loved it. I saw children come in to the school as families moved in. God drew other families into the church. I saw children that were very insecure, children that didn't know a lot in education came in, and the encouragement was there, and the support was there, and they flourished in school. Nicole Kirkpatrick Lowry was on. She gave her testimony. She was one of them that came in, and God did such a work in her life and her mother's life. So to me, to work in the school was tremendous. But through this time, I know there was a lot that Gary and I, struggles that we had, but we had pastors and ministers and friends that were always there for us. It didn't matter. That changed our lives. The strong prayer, the deliverance changed our lives, but having the support and having somebody always giving you the love of God and Jesus, always taking you to Jesus. And I know that's the heart of Sam and Jane Whaley. They just want to see people get born again and serve Jesus and go to heaven. I went through some pretty rough times from the late 90s to about 2010, some very hard personal times. It was very difficult for me. But again, there was my friends and my pastors and my church supported me. I never felt like I was alone on anything. I remember making phone calls at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning when I couldn't sleep. I would call one of my friends, or Patty Welch was one of my friends, and she'd be there in a second. I remember nights when I couldn't sleep because of some of the things that were going on. I remember she would come sleep in a recliner in my bedroom and just be there with me when I needed somebody to be there. That's something the world doesn't have. But when you have that purpose that God puts in you before you're even created, when you got that purpose on the inside of you, all you think about doing is helping others. And that's what I saw and have always seen in my pastors here and the ministers here in this church. They don't care about their own life. They don't care about what they need or want or how they feel. If somebody has a need, they're there. If somebody needs encouragement, they're there. If somebody needs the word of the Lord, they've got the word of the Lord. And that's all we ever felt. And through that period of time, from the late 90s into 2010, I can say that there was such a longing in my heart to find God in ways that I had never known him before. And I remember, I couldn't tell you exactly when it was, but at some point during that time, I remember there was a peace, even in the midst of everything going on, there was such a peace in my heart that came that it didn't matter what happened. Nothing could take that peace. Nothing, absolutely nothing could take that peace. It rocked a few times, but I would get on the phone. and I would say, I need help. I'm thinking this is what's happened, this was whatever. And there was always encouragement, always help. And always I felt the foundation that are in my pastors and the ministers in my life, I felt the foundation in them was being put into me. It was lived in front of me, and it was being put into me through the love of God. That's what got me through. Where I am today, I followed the example. The Bible says, Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ, and that's what I believe that we're supposed to do. And that's what I'm doing. And I haven't worked since 2012, a regular job, but I get to take people to doctor's appointments and stay with them in the hospital and go run errands for people, and I love it. I absolutely love what I'm doing. I love being with people. I love watching God change people's hearts. I love seeing what He's doing in our church. And I mean, I grow up every morning I wake up, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't care. I know that as long as I've got that purpose in my heart, as long as I've got the love of God in my heart and God's speaking to me, I know where I'm going and I know what I'm going to be doing. It's going to be a wonderful day.
That is wonderful, Lisa. And thank you so much, because you have been a big blessing to our church. And as you were just sharing, I see your heart. You just love to help people. And it's amazing how God put this purpose in your heart. Even growing up, you mentioned that your dad was an alcoholic, and then your dad died, and then your mother started drinking and had a problem, and then your mother remarries, and she remarries somebody who's an alcoholic. And you were sharing with me yesterday, he was very abusive to you.
Yes, he was.
And this was where you were sharing that he actually was abusing you when your mom was asleep. Is that what you were?
That's right.
And so you were having to walk the streets at night because your mom was passed out. Your stepdad's abusing you at night, or and so you are literally leaving your house through the night. Is that right?
And then through that time, really, I had a lot of fear in me, a lot. And it was difficult to sleep, even when I was home. I mean, my door was locked, but it was difficult to sleep.
And through all of that, God put His purpose in your heart, even though you maybe didn't have the examples that led you to Jesus. God put His purpose in your heart. And I love the verse that you started off reading in Ecclesiastes. If you could turn to that again, that was so wonderful what you read about that God puts His purpose in us. Would you read that one more time for us?
It says, He has made everything beautiful and appropriate in its time. And God, He created me to be here at this time, in this place, with Jim Bishop on the and Mark. He's also planted eternity, a sense of divine purpose in the human heart, a longing which nothing under the sun can satisfy except God. Only God. People in this world, a lot of them today, generations, they don't have a purpose, Mark. Yeah. And they definitely don't have this purpose. You can copy a purpose that somebody else has, but it's not going to get you through.
You're absolutely right. And that verse is so true, that God puts a longing in our hearts that nothing else can satisfy. Right. We can try to do all of these things, but God says He has placed this desire in our hearts for Him. You know, God made us this way that He created us. The whole purpose is that we have a relationship with Him. I love to think about God, how God loves relationships. He made all of us, starting with Adam and Eve. Why? Because God loves people. God is God of love, and He loves all of us, and He just wants this relationship with us. So when you're born, you have a purpose. Everybody has a purpose.
That's right.
And this purpose is relationship with Him. That's why He made us, because He loves us so much. And that verse says it all, that we're born and we have this divine purpose. It really doesn't matter. Whatever He has us doing with a job or where we live, there's this incredible, wonderful, divine purpose that every single person has, and it's called relationship with Him. Nothing else can beat it. It really doesn't matter what else we do and where we go and the divine purpose of relationship with Jesus and how Jesus led you through going Pennsylvania, Florida, through couple this marriage that didn't work, and then you found Gary, who was such a blessing. But through it all, God had a divine purpose that He put in your heart, and it was relationship with Jesus. And I just love how God brought you through all of your struggles as a young person. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to encourage everybody today. God has a wonderful purpose for all of our lives. And it's called Jesus Christ. It's called relationship with Him. And I just want to encourage you today to seek that purpose that He has for your life. Thank you again for joining us. This is Word of Faith Response. We're here Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 8:30 to 9. Hope you have a great day.